Hey folks, we're going to get started in just a moment. We're going to give everyone a chance to join in. Give everybody a moment to access the webinar and get in here, and we'll be started in just a moment. If you are just joining us, we're going to give everyone a moment to join in before we get started. We still have folks entering now. Welcome to ARMA International's webinar, Identifying Gaps in Information Governance Access Controls, Getting Started. Today's webinar is sponsored by the great folks at Netrix, who have spent 8 years among the fastest growing software companies in the US while attaining more than 150 industry awards since their inception in 2006. And their solutions have been deployed in over 10,000 organizations worldwide. You can visit them on the web at netwrix.com. I'm Nick Inglis. I'm the Executive Director of Content and Programming at ARMA International, and I will be your host for today's webinar. For the elite among us who have attained their IGP, the Information Governance Professional Certification, today's webinar counts towards one continuing education credit for you, which could be applied to one of 4 categories: information management, information security, risk management, or technology. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, feel free to ask in the Q&A box. We are unlikely to get to all questions during the webinar, but will respond to any questions received after the webinar has concluded. In 1995, ARMA International introduced RIM Month to celebrate the importance of records and information management professionals and highlight the value that we bring to organizations and communities. To celebrate 25 years of RIM Month this year, and to support your continuing education needs during this unique time, ARMA International is offering a wealth of complimentary and discounted resources to boost your skills and credentials to help you better serve your organizations. 25 years is our silver anniversary of RIM Month, so we're celebrating by offering you 25% off of some of our most vital resources. ARMA, as an organization focused on education and community, ARMA extends our sincere support to each of you, our members, our industry friends, and partners and colleagues as we navigate the COVID-19 public health crisis together. As you know, this is a complicated and continually evolving situation that we continue to monitor closely through government, public health, and association, convention, and meeting sources. ARMA chapters and regions postponed or are redesigning their spring and summer events, and as ARMA InfoCon 2020, like most associations with fall conferences, ARMA is moving forward with continued and alternative scenario planning. This past week, the Detroit TCF Center notified us that FEMA is repurposing our main event location and their facility into a temporary field hospital for residents of the Detroit area on a month-to-month basis. They and we will know more by the end of May once there's a greater national reassessment of the overall situation. We promise to continue to keep you informed. Again, the safety and best interests of our community remain top of mind. We also remind you to access ARMA resources on our website to help you and your organization during this challenging time. See our COVID-19 resources page linked right from the top of the homepage at arma.org. We look forward to supporting you through this crisis and seeing you on the other side. Please reach out to us with any questions you may have. Next slide, please. If you haven't checked out your membership benefits lately, we're excited to offer online and virtual opportunities to connect and get resourced through your membership. If you aren't an ARMA professional member, as you can see, there are a lot of resources to take advantage of, and it's an affordable way to get resourced as an information professional. More information about ARMA's membership, ARMA professional membership, and getting started can be found on our website at www.arma.org. Without further ado, We're joined today by our Manager of Content Development at ARMA, a legal scholar, researcher, professor, Harvard Law graduate, and lawyer, always proud to introduce her and benefit from her insights personally. It's Ann Snyder.
Thank you for that introduction, Nick.
Joining us from our business partner Netrix is Jeff Melnick. Jeff is the Director of Solutions Engineering at Netrix. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thank you.
ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible. When choosing business partners and solutions for your information programs, I hope that you will give extra consideration to the solution providers who continue to invest in you. Solution providers like Netrix. Obviously, the information provided on this webinar does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all information, content, and materials provided through this webinar are for general information purposes only. It's my honor to transition now over to Ann, who's going to talk about our agenda for today.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about how you can get started in identifying gaps in your organization's information access controls so that you can close those gaps. We'll talk briefly about the importance of getting the right information into the right hands at the right time and why this is such a challenge. Next, we'll turn to identifying some common gaps, and we'll do this through a live walkthrough of a solution so we can see some of this in action. And then we'll turn to Jeff, who's going to talk to us for a few minutes about Netrix. And finally, we'll turn to a Q&A. So if you have questions as we're going through the webinar, make sure you shoot them over so that we can address them at the end. So we've all heard this expression that we need to get information into the right hands at the right times. In recent webinars and white papers, we've addressed each of the points that I'm going to discuss here in much greater detail. So we'll not be diving into them again here because we want to look at the actual walkthrough and higher level concepts, but you can access these at the ARMA website at arma.org if you want to follow up. So addressing appropriate access levels, this is not a once and done effort, of course. You need to maintain appropriate access levels throughout the entire information cycle, life cycle. And for some types of information, that can be incredibly long, depending on the nature of your retention schedule and your industry needs. Of course, getting the right right information into the right hands at the right time means making sure that it doesn't get into the wrong ones. Consequences of failure. Well, if you don't get it into the right hands, it can have massive impacts on employee productivity, for example, damaged customer and other business relationships, lost revenue, as well as regulatory issues. And if it gets into the wrong hands, well, I think we're all familiar with this. In the weeks before our recent COVID experience, it seemed like every other week we had a data breach, and the consequences of that can be lawsuits, investigation, all the sequelae of legal fees and other things like judgments, settlements, and fines associated with that. We also talked in previous webinars and white papers about the components necessary to address these access and security controls for your information. We talked about, for example, identity and access management, granular access controls, as well as secure sharing and integration. Again, I urge you to take a look at the resources that we have available either in webinars and white papers at arma.org. So the challenge that we face when we're managing these access controls is that we're working in incredibly complex technology and information ecosystems. We have many users, applications, systems, and platforms. It's a veritable impossibility to attempt to manage all of those manually. And in addition to that, we are managing complex requirements, both legal, regulatory, and also even business requirements across the myriad of systems that we're looking at. And again, we have to do all of this over time. So the technology changes, the users change, the regulations and other requirements change, and that adds to the access control issue here. So just this is a very simple diagram of, so we can think about this. You need to identify issues that exist within your information access controls. But again, it's not once and done. You identify them, remediate them, but you have to continue monitoring them over time to identify those kinds of things that can actually fall out of alignment. So this discussion is going to be part concept, part discussion, and part demo. And the reason we're doing that is because people have actually requested to see the technology in action. It's fine for us to discuss a concept like setting up alerts and workflows. It's another thing to see that actually in action in an environment. So if you're not familiar with those things, it can seem a little bit abstract. Just a few quick words of caution. This is one vendor solution that we're looking at. Others are going to be very different with different functionalities. The dashboards will have a different feel. And also, this is not a specific endorsement of anyone. The idea here is that we want to concretize some of these concepts to take them out of the abstract. We're going to start by showing you how to get an overview of that entire technology and information ecosystem so you can identify major gaps that and close those very quickly. We also will look at changes in behavior. Your information is not a static environment beyond a snapshot, a point in time. People are doing stuff with your information. That includes regular use, but other activities could indicate that something bad is happening behind the scenes. And if you find out that something nefarious has actually occurred, you're going to want to reconstruct that. So was there a breach, for example? You want to know what its scope was, what was compromised. Of course, you're also going to want to monitor certain changes as they emerge and do that in real time. So you can set up alerts if you find something that's particularly sensitive happening in the background. You'll want to know about those as soon as possible. And others you might want to just look at on a regular basis, monthly, quarterly, or whatever cadence actually works based on the alert and your specific needs. It's very common with so many alerts and lots of functionality to get something like an alert fatigue. So the idea of rolling them up into reports is really helpful. And that could be useful also for, say, producing to an auditor if you needed to do something like that. And eventually, at the end of this, we're going to dig into the content itself and talk about how you can manage sensitive information. And we'll look at some redactions, and if we have time, we'll look at the use case of the right to be forgotten. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jeff. So let's see if we can do this pretty easily. Jeff, you want to take over?
Sure. Let's see. There you go. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Right. So 1 second. I'm not seeing it yet.
Joy's
I am.
in, huh?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, cool.
Give me one second here. I'm experiencing technological difficulties. So,
no worries.
One moment. Sorry about that. So Jeff, 1 second here. I apologize. I have 5 screens open here, it seems. Okay, so Jeff, I'd like to start first with a high-level risk assessment. Would you be able to pull up that risk assessment, that overview dashboard? So this is a Netrix-specific dashboard, and what it actually does is it pulls together multiple other reports into one place. And the idea is you could, if you wanted to, look at those individual reports on their own. But the idea is this sort of scoops up a bunch of major issues that are pretty common. And Jeff, if you can just, my understanding is when we were talking about this, the reason these were selected is because they were common problems that you saw across multiple users. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. We see this these are some of the more common requests we get either from compliance or just general security where they want to just have a better idea. And like you said, everything in this case kind of flows up
right.
In sort of a color-coded that mechanism.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And the idea here is, I mean, I think everyone on this call is probably familiar with, using a basic document management system where you set up access controls around a specific subset of information. If you think of something sensitive, maybe like HR files, you could restrict access to part of the file plan to the HR group, and of course go even more granular than that to folders, subfolders, maybe even at the document level, or potentially down to the content. For example, mythical HR person Bob, needs access to some document, but he doesn't need access to, say, Ann Snyder's social security number. So we can do redactions or masking depending on the functionality of the system. But even if you've done that, there can still be major gaps in your access controls across a technology ecosystem that need to be locked down. And we can see a couple of these here. And again, this is why these have been rolled up into this risk assessment overview. I think it should be pretty obvious. So we're looking under users and computers. If you can highlight these as I talk through some of them, it should be pretty obvious that accounts with inappropriate credentialing are a problem. And we see some here, user accounts with passwords that never expire, or user accounts with passwords that aren't required. And we're drilling down into some of those. So Bob, my mythical HR person, appropriately has access to the folder or subfolder or document, but he has a gaping hole into there's a gaping hole into your data because his account isn't secured. And so that's a way that his account could be exploited to access information. It would also be really tough unless there were some other indicia like access off hours or things like that to know that it wasn't Bob appropriately accessing that. Do you have anything to add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, 100%. It lets you, and this allows you to see those different sort of high points. Certainly one of the reasons we created this was we started getting a lot of requests from customers that said, hey, you've got a lot of data, but I just need to, I don't know where to start.
Right.
Or, I just need to see sort of a snapshot in time of what's going on and see what I can work out. And in some cases, there's a lot of things that maybe they just weren't thinking about, right? Like you said, when you're trying to look at it across the entire ecosystem, it's going to give you a little bit different perspective, maybe one you didn't think of. So,
and this is a way, this is an idea again of getting started. It's not every single thing that you need to lock down, or even all the specific tailoring to your organization. Can you go back to the main dashboard there for a second? Another one that we see on here are inactive user accounts. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
So inactive user accounts, and obviously this is a kind of a test environment, so I've got a lot of sort of inactive accounts, but this is a big concern, especially from compliance, where we've got users who have left, and I, working in IT, have had this problem as well, where someone leaves the organization and you don't find out for maybe 6 months. They had full access to everything. One instance where someone was let go and they proceeded to go back and email everyone in the company about, some sensitive information. I'll leave it at that. And yeah, that was wildly unnecessary. So it's really about closing those gaps and making sure that people shouldn't have access don't have access.
And it's easy. I think most larger organizations have some kind of offboarding process, but even there, it's possible to miss those kinds of things. And again, even if you have appropriately secured a given part of your document management system, for example, if this account remains open, that's basically a gap directly into that content. Can we go back to the dashboard again? Another issue is sort of just permissions issues and accounts that have too much permission for information. So can you talk us through some of that?
Sure. So this lets you go through and really see, we track things like changes made to different groups, but we also want to see who's currently a member of those groups as well. We can see this at the file and folder level, but obviously we need to be able to see this at the Active Directory level as well. And so this gives you kind of a quick overview of who actually is a member of these different groups. And you can specify a variety of groups. These are just kind of administrative groups in this particular view. But we can also give you things like, you can see there's 9 or 10 users here that are account operators, but I can actually load older sessions as well. And I can see sort of a different sort of point in time to see that, back on, actually December 24th of 2018, there were only 5 people in this group. So it's very easy to see who's in there today, maybe who's in there last month or last quarter. I can run a change report of that same time frame. Gives you a lot of information about groups and changes made to those.
And so the tip off here, or the concern here, if you're looking at this at a high level, is that you see a bunch of people, that you have more people with this very broad permission level than you would expect. And you might want to pare that back, right?
Yeah, we're not always a big fan of least privilege, especially when people are complaining. I actually used to work with somebody where if he spent more than 5 minutes working on an issue, he would actually just make you a domain admin, which will solve most of your issues, but is a terrible practice for, giving 3/4 of the company administrative rights to your entire environment.
It's easier to manage. You don't have to do a whole lot of privileging or specific privileging of the folders, but it's a nightmare otherwise. Someone just mentioned in the chat, and I think this is a good point, is people don't just leave the company, they move from one group to another. So we do actually touch on that in a moment. So we will get to that issue. Someone leaves the group. When do you want to check that and keep an eye on it? Because someone might have had appropriate access in one context and moves to another division of the organization and shouldn't be seeing that information. That's something that very often gets missed as well. So if we can scroll down a little bit here, so we have other things like empty security groups, administrative groups, but if we scroll down to data here, I think this is interesting as well. Again, we think we have provisioned everything appropriately, and nobody ever thinks that they do, that they grant access to everyone, but it's virtually impossible to check every folder, every subfolder, every document that's permissioning manually across even a relatively small organization. And this allows you to see some of that, some of the issues connected to folder permissionings that might exist across your organization. And then you can walk us through this a little bit, Jeff. It's pretty obvious. I think the group is everyone here.
Right. Yeah. And so by default, I mean, I can look at any user or group, which is especially nice too if someone says, hey, I need the same access as, whoever. But, we talk a lot about, hey, do you guys use the everyone group? And almost everyone says no, or maybe on my public folder. And like you said, usually it's 12, 15 pages of the everyone group later on folders all over the place. Where you're like, hey, maybe you haven't been using that, but clearly somebody in the organization has. And it could have been, 3 years ago. It's just old files and folders kicking around that could have sensitive data in them.
Right.
And like you said, trying to check that manually, it's not easy.
It's tough. And I mean, it's possible. I mean, we see one here. So this is a nice lead into the, the other, but I want to see it from the dashboard if you can go back. But the idea is, it might be perfectly fine, depending on what the folder is and what its contents are, to have it accessible to everyone in the organization. But if it's connected with a name like payroll or something like that, that may be a tip off that there's an issue. So that leads to the next one. So file folders and names containing sensitive data.
Yep.
So that's this isn't. I think this is important. It's not drilling down into the actual content of the folders. We're going to talk about that a little bit toward the end, but this is just looking at the file names and the paths basically to see indicia that there might be something sensitive in there.
Yeah, like you said, it's just kind of a high-level pass. So we can, like you said, certainly drill down into all the records, but in especially real large record deposits, that's computationally intensive. So this gives you just kind of a quick high-level pass of, hey, are these things correct? You can also change the types of keywords that it's looking for as well. So that's completely configurable as well. Like you said, for SSN or password or all kinds of other good stuff.
Okay. And if we go back there, we also see, I do want to, so I just want to not dig into this one, but that you could have potentially harmful files on the computer that you can grab. Again, we're looking at, these are the major gaps that we're trying to identify here. So those could be executable files, but then there's also connected to the permissioning, in particular, is direct permissions on files and folders. Can we look at that for a second? Because this is, again, you think you have your permissioning set appropriately, but what we're looking at here, as you can see up on the search that is included in this, if you can highlight the objects with inherited permissions. So this is, you're only looking at the instances, I guess, where there are actually breaks in the inheritance.
Correct. So we're looking at the root folder, and any folders underneath are different. Like you said, if there's 1,000 subfolders in there, and only 3 of them are different, you probably only care about those 3. And again, from a best practice perspective, makes it really easy from a compliance check of, hey, is this person a member of a group? And you can see for the most part, I have this sort of, user that doesn't follow best practice and is on everything. So
right, and the idea here is we're getting at the likely problematic subsets of the data as quickly as possible in this dashboard. That's what's being highlighted here, as opposed to checking every folder. Okay, so if you can go back to that. Again, this is just again, it's a dashboard that's allowing you to visualize this. You can see on the side, and we won't go into this in too much detail, but you can set the risk level. So there's if you can pop into that briefly, just you can modify, what constitutes different level of risk so that you can prioritize. Some of these might be less concerning to you in your particular environment. For example, you might have a, just an anomaly that makes you different than other organizations. So you can adjust this so that you can prioritize which ones you want to tackle first. Now, people can use this as a point in time snapshot, but of course, we also want to see what people are doing with your data. So, you know,
Sure.
your data isn't static. So if you can switch over to the demo of the enterprise overview.
Sure.
So again, this is, you know, so what we see here is this is a dashboard of activity against your organization. You want to keep an eye on activity around your information because a spike could indicate that something is happening. You want to investigate those. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Sure. So I'm a big fan of graphical and summary reports. It really helps to bring large volumes of data into a very concise view of what's actually going on. So there's things like changes by date, failed activity, and this, again, we look at multiple platforms in this case, so files, SQL, Active Directory, etc. And like I said, I might be more concerned about some of these, or over here I've got not much going on over the weekend. This is looking at data access trends. So I've got a lot of reads, which is not a surprise. I've got some modifications, a couple of deletions, but now all of a sudden I've got 20 deletions. And considering I don't have that many in here, you can drill down in and take a closer look and say, hey, who is this user and why are they deleting all of these files from accounting? Is this a legitimate reason? If they're here, cleaning something up, you can see here, she's an IT contractor. That might be legitimate, but if it's her last day, then this might not be legitimate. We've certainly seen those types of instances many times as well.
I think we also see that. I think the one that I find particularly interesting is the failed activity trend. You see people attempting to log into information there.
Yeah, and again, you could drill down into this and see, again, what types of failed activity have taken place. And so this triggers, in some cases, multiple instances. There's a couple of other reports as well. This, again, if you're looking if you see a spike, there's a couple of really neat summary reports as well we can drill into. Take a closer look as far as, hey, what is or is not right? Again, I think the power of a lot of the graphical and summary reports is I can look at it and see right away something is wrong. I may not know what it is, but I know something's wrong, and I can drill down in and investigate it in more detail.
And I think that what's neat here is, and I just to remind everyone, this is a specific dashboard that you have configured that again is highlighting 6 areas of potential changes that might indicate that something's going on with your data. You get a baseline and you see a spike that's worth investigating. Of course, you can look at this same data through other reporting features, but the idea here and the advantage is that you're visualizing it. It has a way of rolling up the data in a much more clearly understood way, and that you wouldn't be able to see, I don't think, looking at the individual alerts on their own, or even sometimes if they're reported, you might spot it, but at least this is comparing it to the baseline. So that's one of the things you want to consider as part of a solution on these visualization tools that give you a bird's eye view of what's going on with your data versus that static reporting. And not all solutions are going to have the same visualization capabilities, but you can also consider integrating it with tools that specialize in that. And example would be something like Tableau or similar data visualization tools.
Yeah, we do a lot of integrations with other SIEM solutions. We can pull and push data, ITSM solutions for help desk, stuff like that. So we try to give people as many options as possible to either drive something or take our data and do something else, or again to pull data in from really any platform that's out there for the most part.
Right, and how you're going to want to visualize it again is going to be, based on the needs of your organization. Or you might want to look at something that's unique to your organization. So this also allows you to get a nice baseline of the activity at your organization, which can help you set thresholds for alerts in your system. So you know what's normal, so you can identify what's an aberration. So can we shift over to the alerts section?
Sure. So there you go.
So this tool actually, we see that I think you guys have a number of out-of-the-box alerts already configured. We don't want to spend a whole lot of time in this because we're going to look at how you can configure those under the reporting feature. Would it be typical, Jeff, for a client to turn on all of these? I see that there's an on and off switch.
They do. That's a little crazy. It's we try to give them guidance as well, so we do a lot around compliance, which I touch on a little bit later. But
we do. Yeah.
if you've got specific compliance types or specific requirements, we want to make sure. If you're not sure, we recommend kind of slow rolling into this as well. Or again, so you saw those mass data removals, for example. So maybe I should have had an alert for that, right? So I can go in here and say, hey, that was an issue. Let me turn this on. Let me specify this for whoever. Pretty easy to go in. And again, I can specify thresholds as well. It's because I exit that filter out here. There we go. And again, bunch of different options. You can set thresholds so that if you have a user who normally goes through and deletes 20 files a day, you probably want to set your threshold a little bit higher. Probably don't have one that happens that frequently though. So again, allows you to see what's going on depending on the size of the organization and really what you're doing.
Okay, and so you have an alert. So we see, okay, somebody's massively deleting files. What can you do with that? So how do I find out that there's a problem?
So there's a couple different ways we can kind of dig into this. Obviously, one is through the reporting. We can look through the search. There's the behavior anomalies. It lets you pull data in as well. So actually, I can drive into that real quick. So with the behavior anomalies, just very quickly, this is designed to kind of aggregate the alerts into a separate dashboard. So you can kind of see that, hey, something again might not be right. And this is designed, like you said, to help combat alert fatigue. Most customers don't have the kind of Goldilocks situation with alerts. They either have no alerts or way too many.
Right.
And to have that numbers is kind of ridiculous. So this allows me to drill in and look at these different alerts and decide, hey, does this alert even make sense? Should I, go through, tweak it maybe? If this person is, before he administered password resets for users because he works at the help desk and he's doing that all day, every day, do I care? Probably not.
Probably not, right.
So again, it allows you to help combat that sort of alert fatigue here in that case.
And it's also, you can see the blips, and I think that's a really neat feature. And you can see here, and we won't drill into this too much, but there's a risk score that you can basically weight each of those alerts so that and aggregate them here. So you can see that those top people are, well, at least the one, there's a risk score of 280. I'm not sure how high that is, what the relative weighting is here, but you can see that those are the ones who are up to something.
Yeah,
again, said, not necessarily nefarious, but they're doing something in the data, and maybe it's worth looking at. Can we go back to the alerts just for a second? I just wanted to highlight one of the issues here was sort of multiple failed logins. I think we have a lot of these that are indicative of attempts to access information. You can have a failed login because you forgot your password, or you're mistyping it or something. But there's some indications, rapid logins, things like that, or multiple failed logins that exceed a certain number suggest that it's more than just a password reset issue, or even multiple failed logins across numerous accounts that can indicate there's a broader attack.
Yeah, exactly. So this type of alert is very easy for something like, again, hey, someone's trying to brute force Bob's attack, Bob's account rather, and after X number of failed logons, it'll kick off an alert. But when you're looking for something like password spray attacks, where instead of hitting a specific account thousands of times, they'll hit all of your accounts once, say every 30 minutes. And this way, they fall under the account lockout threshold, and they're able to slowly use basic passwords and very sort of low profile attack to get in there. So I can change the thresholding mechanism to say, hey, I just want to know if I get just a significant number of failed logons, period, in a very short period of time, that's a concern.
And so you're talking also about, so they're trying the easy passwords like password 12345 or those kinds of things.
Right. Spring 2020, yeah, those types of things where, and they're unfortunately really effective. And then here's where we're talking about the risk score, where you can most of the out of the box alerts have these, and then you can tweak these a little bit as well.
And that's an easy way to skirt your otherwise password failed attempts protection pretty easily. And if you have one account that has that kind of non-robust, I'll be nice about it, password selection, now you have another major just gaping hole into your information, and depending on where that is, that could be some very sensitive information and could be exploited. So we also want to talk about, the ability to target alerts around specific folders. So if we have information, so this is under if we can move to the search function. So we obviously want to make sure that, we might even want to put basically protections around sensitive information, so we know who's going in there and who's doing what with some of our more sensitive information, or things that are, for example, inactive. Like if we have an archive folder that people shouldn't be in the first place, we would want to see some of that information. So can you show us this a little bit?
Sure. So the search is kind of cool because it allows you to kind of go in and see what people are doing. And I can see across the different platforms. I can look for very specific types of information. So, again, if I'm looking for anything associated with, the HR data folder, for example, I can see a lot of, this guy here has made a lot of changes. I can kind of scroll down through these. And then, again, here's that contractor again. And you can see she's read a number of files. There's an affidavit, actually her own account review, which is funny. And then you can kind of drill in very, very easily and make a determination as far as, hey, if I see something doesn't look right, it allows me to investigate this very, very easily and see what's going on, again, across maybe multiple environments. So maybe if I, decide to X this out here, I'll go in and say, hey, you know what? I really just want to focus on this person. What has she done recently? If I can spell her name correctly. And then just do kind of a quick search, and I can see all the activity she's got across the entire environment. And so there's logon data, there's file server data, some Active Directory changes. And again, this is that account that made all of those, deletions here. You can see, added herself in this case to the accounting, global accounting group. And you can kind of lay out the full mechanism of this entire attack. In fact, you can see after she deleted that, she actually removed herself.
Okay, so this search functionality is a way to drill down. So once you've identified some anomalous behavior, you can go in here and find out what happened. So, I've seen a spike in activity. It's associated with this shady character, Bob, who keeps coming up. What is Bob doing? And we actually see what folders he's accessed, what he's removed. Is he putting, executables on somewhere, and so on. And did you show in the previous screen? I'm sorry, I looked away for a second. Did you show like the access to a specific folder?
So I can definitely see access to specific folders. Usually easier in the reports, but I can certainly see who has been accessing a specific folder. So again, and that's kind of why I drilled into this HR or drilled into this user. Is again very easy to see what a specific user does, and I can even go through and include or exclude data. I can look for things off hours, if she's in a group or not in a group. And then one of the cool functions is I can also say this is a report, or this is right where I can drive right into that alert mechanism. So again, if you're like, hey, something doesn't look right now, I really want to know, and I want to get maybe just a daily report, or maybe I want to know right away if something happens, you can go through and generate that pretty easily.
And you could set up those alerts right on on folder activity as well, right?
So let's say, for example, I'll just go back real quick. So actually, I'll do this. I'll just add a HR data. So if I want to see, again, anything that she does in HR data, pretty easy for me to see all the different files she's accessed. And then if I want to, again, drill into alerts, I can do that. It builds the filters for you automatically. It just pulls it right out of there. Again, you can do thresholding. There's that risk score. And you can even have it do other things like have it run a script of some sort. So obviously, it's nice to get an email, but you can, again, integrate it with something like ServiceNow or some other ITSM solution, or have it do something else, maybe disable her account or something of that nature. So.
And if you go back to the configuration of that, the number of parameters that you can apply to it is pretty robust here, right?
Yeah, definitely. If I drop this down here a little bit, actually I'll drop this in advanced mode just so you can kind of see. We try to make things easy for you, but we can definitely make it much more interesting. So we can do things like within working hours. We can do, if I'm looking at the who, instead of just saying, hey, a user, I can see in a group, not in a group. So again, one of the common ones we get is I want to know if someone is accessing HR data who's not actually in the HR group.
Right.
So in other words, an admin who has access to it, they want to know about that.
And that's actually that's a nice segue into what I wanted to get to next was, and it sort of ties into one of the questions that came up from our viewers, was the idea of a common item that people want to monitor are group changes. So again, we have people who leave the organization, but we also have people who are moving between groups. And one of the sort of legacy issues is we keep Bob in his original group for some time period as he moves into a new role, but we never get to the point of disabling his account in there. So the best approach again is to manage people by roles, not directly, but also to monitor those changes in the groups. Can you show us that?
Sure. So if I go into, and I can do this at the file server level as well, but let's say I want to go in and I can, track changes to groups, but more interestingly, probably in this case is again, that group, just blanked out here, group members, that's what I'm looking for, where I can specify a particular group, right? So let's say, for example, I want to see everybody, associated with maybe I have a ton of HR groups and I want to know all the members of my HR groups, as of right now or what have you. I can do that, and then I can subscribe to these and send these out, either daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, Mondays and Tuesdays, whatever. I can even upload to via email or via share. So again, from a compliance perspective, especially with something like SOX, where you need to go in and verify things like permission changes and who has access, pretty powerful. It takes a lot of the tedium of having to do this manually.
It's good to creating those reports for just that routine attestation to just to confirm.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've already I had next in my list here to go through behavior anomalies, but again, a lot of these can be rolled up into that behavior anomalies view. But you can also, if you've set up reports, people can subscribe to the reports here, receive them via email. They could receive direct alerts, but you can also, I think you can import some of these into ticketing systems as well.
Yeah, so you do all kinds of cool stuff with this, which is nice. So it's very, very dynamic in this case. There's a lot of different sort of out-of-the-box integrations, and then there's a RESTful API as well. So we can pretty much integrate with most platforms that are out there, which is nice.
Okay. And that's one of the things that we've talked about previously in handling these access controls. The need to have some of that integration so that one system that's creating an alert is connected to all the other locations where it needs to go. So let's just shift on to reporting if we can. Can we just take a quick look at that?
Yeah, sure. So let me
go back
cover
to the dashboard if you. So I think so I know there are a bunch of out-of-the-box reports that you have. And again, we saw some of those that were rolled up, and I think we've already looked at the groups and the attestation. Can we also just look at the reports that you have associated with file folder access, so accessing sensitive information?
Sure. So let me go into there. So we can, like I said, we can certainly go in there. We can also look at classification of files and folders and where that sensitive data is actually located. So in this case, if I go into here, and again, this is where we're talking about actually drilling down into all the different files and folders and looking at the content of those. You can see, in accounting, this looks legitimate. HR, okay. My public folder, I got PII data.
Something you might want to investigate right there. So
right. Especially as we just saw that everyone has access to the public folder. So clearly there are some sensitive files out here, and I need to know, what they're doing out there.
And so that sort of leads us into the so you have a number of these that are configured. Again, I think that it might be easy to get. These are the pre-configured ones, and you can also configure your own. I think there's the possibility too of getting that sort of alert fatigue, but report fatigue. So I know that you've mapped some of these to specific requirements. So HIPAA compliance, for example. So again, you wouldn't want to use every single reporting feature on here. You'd want to roll up the ones that are most relevant to you. Again, so you're not overwhelming yourself with data. Can you show some of those compliance mappings here?
So here's one actually for HIPAA. And basically what we do is we give you kind of a quick layout of, some of the controls. This is actually the middle of the document, I probably should have. But one of the ones that I think is a little bit more relevant is we'll actually go through, so configuration change control, for example, will actually give you a listing of the reports that are applicable to these specific compliances and sub-compliances, so that you know where to get started, right? So again, you can go look at this document and say, hey, I need this information. Let me subscribe to these. I need it daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. And again, just start getting those reports right off the bat.
And this is just initial guidance on those mappings. Obviously, you can configure them as appropriate for your organization. We want to just keep moving. We have a couple more points to cover before I hand over to you. Can we go into the data discovery? So we just talked about folders and files that contain air quote sensitive information. So that begs the question of how do we know it's sensitive? So there's also a data discovery capability. Again, that's something that you'll want to have as part of an integrated solution. You want to know where that sensitive data is. So can you walk us through this pretty quickly?
Sure. So we have I'll give you kind of a quick overview. So there's a bunch of out-of-the-box different rule sets we call taxonomies, and this could be for GDPR, CCPA, legal, PCI, et cetera. Most of these are out of the box. You can create your own, which is cool. Very, very easy to create your own. So if I go into something like PCI, you can see we use a variety of different rule sets. So for something like regexes, keywords, but we can also look at other pretty neat things as well. For phrase matching, metadata. So if you want to pull out not only PCI data, but older PCI data, so you want to do something else with that, maybe move that to some other storage, a lot of different options.
Right, so this tool, because it's a data discovery tool, can not just be used for discovering that sensitive information, but also used for identifying other things like rot or even for e-discovery and stuff like that too.
Yeah, so you can definitely go into create workflows, and then you can write tags for DLP. You can migrate data. You can again remove things that are duplicates or older data. Very, very easy to go through and configure that through the wizard.
I think especially relevant to the management of the sensitive information. So I find, I've done my cleanup, and now I'm monitoring some folders, and somebody put some sensitive information where it doesn't belong. So I can set up an alert to detect that. Can you show us what you can do? You started getting into some of that for the remediation generally, but can you show us how we could set up quarantines and things like that, and redactions of information?
So I can set up a quick, hey, where do I want to do this? And again, do I want to email someone? I can move data. I can also move it and then email them. And then, what do I want to do with it really? So I'm going to, maybe like you said, maybe I'm going to send it to something like a sensitive quarantine folder or something like that, or a redaction folder. And then depending on what I want to do with it and the different use cases, I can copy it. I can redact the data as well. I might, again, copy it, I might move it. Especially if it's something like a quarantine mechanism. And again, I can redact the data, so that if I want to leave a copy, that has sensitive information or useful information rather, but not necessarily sensitive. So in other words, I want to strip out social security numbers or credit card data. I can do that as well, and be able to make a copy of those documents and make it more accessible to those who need it.
Okay. And we're running out of time. I want to switch over to you shortly, but can you talk a little bit about the right to be forgotten use case here? So we've received a request to, clean up records. How do we, how can we use this tool to confirm that we've done that completely?
So there's a really neat, because we go through and we index all the information that's out there, you can do a very quick search for information. So this is originally from Content Management Tool. It's really the birth of this, and so it makes it very, very easy. If I want to look for somebody like Erica, I can see a text file with her, name and birth date. Here's an RTF file with her name and some MasterCard data, and then here is, we can do OCR as well. So if you're scanning in people's, driver's licenses or social security cards or what have you, that's sensitive data as well. And you want to make sure you keep track of that and know where that is. So.
Okay. All right. I think we should switch over to a few words about Netrix if you are ready to do that.
Sure. So let me do this, and I'll buzz through these relatively quickly because I know we're a little short on time.
We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. If we run over time a little bit, it'll be in that Q&A portion. I hope most folks will be able to stay with us for a little extra.
Okay, cool. So just again, kind of a quick overview. We've been around for almost 14 years at this point. And you guys, one of the things I find most interesting about this really is the different verticals and different types of people we work with, which is basically everyone. Everyone with sensitive data, whether it be the governments, financial, healthcare, et cetera. Again, the whole thing we were talking about earlier with the ability to identify that data, remediate it, and continue to monitor it. Again, this is that sort of NIST framework as well, where again, same kind of idea. What are the problems? What are we going to do with it? And then kind of circling back around, constantly trying to kind of resolve that. As far as some of the data sources that we cover a lot of pretty much everything in the Microsoft stack, as well as things like VMware, Oracle. And then we can go through and we can discover a lot of that data as well. So, we support obviously things like Windows file servers, Nutanix, NetApp, EMC, all kinds of good stuff. So again, the ability to kind of bring all of that into a single location and really dig down into it is pretty powerful. And then again, if you guys are like, hey, that's a pretty neat product, obviously I'm somewhat biased as far as my information, but if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to go into it in more detail, and I won't spend too much time on this because I think you guys are all getting copies of the slides anyway. And then I'll jump over to Q&A.
Great, Jeff. And we've had some great questions coming in throughout the webinar. Our first question is, our organization for years has given individual permission to users that have broken our permissions inheritance. What's the best way to back ourselves out of this problem now?
Stop doing that. Yeah, no, so there's, and that's pretty common, is really just to go through, and you're gonna have to spend a little bit of legwork to kind of analyze the folder structures. And, this tool and others will allow you to see who's actually using that information, create groups, and maybe you need to, if you have groups and maybe you need like a sort of a one-off, maybe you need to create a couple extra groups. It's really, really hard to give someone access, especially when someone comes on board or moves departments. Hey, they need the same access that Bob has. Well, if Bob's assigned all over creation, again, here you can go and you can see every folder that he's assigned to. But if you're just trying to do it manually, that is going to be a nightmare. So the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be, honestly.
Brilliant. Our next question comes from my friend Keter Thakkar. Hey, Keter. The first question that came to his mind, and I'll direct this one over to Anne, is at what point in time should this concept be introduced in the development of an overall IG program? Alternatively, does the organization have to be at a certain level of maturity to digest and dig into this concept? It's a great question.
Wow. So I want everything at the beginning of the creation of an organization. So I actually think it's a lot easier to keep your information organized and monitored and cleaned up and have the access controls appropriately set from the beginning of your organization. We don't, of course, many of us are building IG programs in existing organizations. So that's that goes to that first question, the idea that you have to, back out and clean up bad practices. I think that, every organization needs some kind, unless you're a one-person organization, if you have multiple people, even a small organization with 10 people needs some way of monitoring some of these big gaping access issues across the organization. It's very easy to outstrip the ability of an individual person to manage that in a manual way. So I wouldn't think that you have to be at a super high level maturity. What you're going to tackle is going to be possibly less comprehensive. You'll be handling some of the bigger issues as you drill down and get better. But I don't think you have to be at a super high level of sophistication to take advantage of these. I think a lot of smaller and mid-sized organizations think they don't need it, but we all know that it's not a question of, if you get attacked, it's a question of when, and you shouldn't, think that you're not on the radar of bad actors just because you're smaller. So I hope that's answered that.
That's a great answer. I'd probably add to that. For organizations at a lower level, lower maturity level, this tool is likely to help you move up in your maturity, or a tool like this in this category is likely to help you move up in your maturity overall.
Absolutely, but if I can add to that too, is just the purpose of part of this. One of the major goals of this discussion is to show people that this is available to them, and it's certainly these kinds of technologies are pretty readily available again to small and mid-sized organizations. It's not just for the major players to take advantage of these insights across your entire technology and information ecosystem. So you should definitely look into this kind of capability.
And our next question is, I'll leave this anonymous since it doesn't get tracked back to the individual organization. This person says, we have a master sheet that we add details of date, requester and changes, or add, delete, and change access to their user accounts. Is this redundant effort for audit and compliance, or should most systems be able to provide this audit trail? I'm not sure who wants to take that one.
Yeah, I could take it. So, I mean, depending on what you're looking at. So obviously things like SharePoint have some built-in mechanisms. File server does. We pull a lot of that data off. The problem is it's not stored anywhere long-term, and it's kind of terrible. So even any kind of base audit mechanism should be able to compile that data for you, and give you a mechanism to track that back pretty easily. I didn't get into it, but you can see clearly things like permission changes, who made those changes, what they were applied to, you know, all that information.
Brilliant. And then Jeff, another one for you. This one comes from Dimitri. Can the auditor tool be applied against any repository? What are some, and I know this came in before you showed that slide, but what are some of the systems that the auditing tool can be used with?
So for auditing, we've got a relationship now with Nutanix. Certainly Windows file servers, anything that has a Windows Server front end. So if you have any kind of sort of SAN or NAS solution that's sort of fronted by a Windows VM, anything from NetApp, EMC. We're always looking to add others as well, so feel free to reach out to us. There's other things in the works that we're trying to add. So if you've got something in particular, let us know.
That's great. Next question. We've got a lot of them in, and I love this. Assuming there isn't a budget for a technology solution, where or how do you recommend starting?
Wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that if I can field at least the first part of that is, you know, I think it's best practices, you know, letting people, like, making it clear to people, you know, what the expectations are. That, you know, for example, issues around passwords. Obviously, there shouldn't be an account out there with a bogus password. There shouldn't be accounts out there with ones that don't expire. You know, those are very simple things. And as long as people understand that, and also understand that it's their responsibility to flag it when they see holes like that, you know, around folderings and permissions to, you know, sensitive information. If you tell people what the expectation is, you can go a very long way with protecting your information. But I think very often we don't communicate that as well as we should. So again, I would set the standards, communicate them to people, and then also, you know, make it clear to them that it's their responsibility to flag things like that as well. Because if you give people ownership of it, and also get them to check the folders they're responsible for, to flag that information, I think most people, if you give them the instructions and are clear about it, are willing to flag some of that. It's a bit of a strong arm effort, but it can be done as long as you divide that up amongst different parties.
Yeah, we actually have a freeware version as well for this product. So especially if you're a small shop, and that's one of the things that we run into, where there's only one or two people making changes, and we're just, in this case, looking straight at activity. We're not doing a lot of the back-end correlation that we normally do, but we can tell you that, hey, a bunch of changes had taken place. And so often we see people start off with that, and then you'd be surprised how much budget you get when something goes terribly wrong. And, you know, because we've seen a lot of small businesses basically cease to exist, because when you have a major breach, they're the ones least able to absorb that, right? So if you have a $2 million price tag for a breach and having to let people know, it's not necessarily going to be within your scope for small business, right? So what's going to be cheaper in the long run? So there's certainly some incremental steps you can take, again, best practices, et cetera. But I guess anything is better than nothing. And then again, trying to convince the higher ups that the security is important. So.
And I'm connected to that. I'm always amazed at, you know, again, we see what's happening around us in other, you know, players in the industry, and we decide that we're going to wait until it happens to us before we think it's important enough to budget for it. So I think, you know, you can also make a case by showing what's happened to others in your industry, or just generally with these kinds of breaches. Jeff, I know you had sort of a war story of one of your you know, prospective client. They already had a potential issue, but they weren't able to sort of track it down because they didn't have technology in place. I hope that's not too cryptic
Yeah,
for you
no,
to know which one I'm
it
talking about.
happens. Yeah, and it happens all the time. I mean, there unfortunately there are more than I'd like to more than I'd like to mention, but it's a reality at this point. And if you're not taking positive steps to protect yourself, you're gonna you're gonna lose at some point.
And the instance I was thinking about was the one with the person had left the company and the person's account wasn't shut down, and they basically had no way of sort of reconstructing if this person did anything to the data. So
6 months out. Well, I actually had a client too recently where they said, hey, they had hired a new admin, made him a domain admin, and 3 days later he came and said, I don't have administrative rights. And what had happened is they'd given somebody else in the company full-blown access to everything. And they said, hey, that's great. What did this guy do? And they were like, I don't know. So that's when, so we get called in a lot when something has gone terribly wrong.
Right.
So you're saying call you before it goes terribly wrong.
Right. It's cheaper beforehand. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And one last question here before we wrap. We just touched on some of the capabilities of the system related specifically to these particular use cases. The tool can obviously do a lot more, and we touched on some of that, but one question came in, can the application be used for file cleanup?
Yeah, I think we did sort of touch on that a little bit at the end there, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there. I know, Jeff, you probably have more to say in this, but it has the data discovery capabilities. So we looked at the use case specifically where you're identifying sensitive information, social security numbers, credit card numbers, and that sort of thing, or configuring it to find something that's unique for you. But once you've bothered to index the data, and this is sort of an issue I have generally with indexing data. That's costly. That's time intensive. You've done it. You can use that indexing information for so much more than one use case. You don't just index for enterprise search. You don't just index for e-discovery or it's finding sensitive information. You can repurpose that indexing for a ton of functionality. So. Sorry, Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Like you said, whether it's removing duplicates, old data, again, old sensitive data, maybe migrating some of that data off. I mean, we can definitely help you with that.
Very cool. Well, I want to thank Jeff. Thank you so much. And Anne, thank you so much as always for today's webinar. And thank you both for continuing to serve this community by sharing your knowledge. Our next webinar will be April 22nd. Keep an eye on your email. You can register for that one. We're going to be talking about ROI, and we'll have a panel of heavy hitters joining us for that. So keep an eye on your email inbox there. Before we close, I'd like to remind you to become a professional member of ARMA International. Take the time to invest in yourself. ARMA has an array of resources available to you from our white papers, our training, and magazine. In our magazine right now, you can read the first 2 parts of a 4-part series that we've been doing with Louis Eisen on policy and wording policy. That's available at magazine.arma.org. On behalf of our speakers, the wonderful folks at Netrix who give of their time and money to sponsor programming like this webinar today, and all of us at ARMA International, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar and wish you the best in all of your information endeavors. Stay safe, and if you can, stay home. We're going to get through this together. Have a great one.
Thanks.